White. Depending on how you look at it, it can mean anything and everything. Innocence, purity, isolation, emptiness, or complete nothingness. A striking blank void. In art, white can be used to separate. Because the colour is so eye-catching, it is often used as a barrier, a background, or a defining feature, like the reflection of light in an eye. Or in some cases, such as with Rubens' vase, it can be used as an illusion. In 1915, Danish psychologist Edgar Rubin developed a set of two-dimensional forms known as Rubens' vase, stating that when two fields have a common border and one is seen as figure and the other as ground, the immediate perceptual experience is characterized by a shaping effect which emerges from the common border of the fields and which operates only on one field or operates more strongly on one than the other. In other words, your eyes are drawn to the border and your brain decides which side is the intended image, or the positive space, and the blank space determined to be the background? Well, that's one of the most common places negative space is utilised is in comics. Since their inception, comics have been using negative space to separate panels. The white space between the panels is referred to as the gutter and is used to show a clear, distinct movement in time. The gutter is a resting point for the viewer's eyes, acting almost as a manual blink for the reader. However, in recent years, many artists have taken creative liberties with the gutter, reinventing and repurposing it to highlight key movements or objects. The gutter simply separates panels, but it is negative space that has been given a whole new purpose in recent years. A shining example of this is the critically acclaimed Jeff Lemire and Greg Smallwood collaboration, Moon Knight. In this 2018 run, Greg Smallwood uses white negative space in Moon Knight's costume to show the character's detachment from reality. Mark, Jake, Stephen, and every other alter is drawn in detail. It is only when the character dons the white suit that Smallwood utilises negative space, giving the effect that the character transforms into a sort of hole in the page. The character is no longer a part of the universe, but instead becomes the negative space. The negative space is not only a striking visual choice, but it also holds a deeper thematic meaning. Mark Spector is placed in a mental institution and spends a sizable chunk of the run re-evaluating his entire life. He is stripped right down to a blank state of mind, surrounded by white. White walls, white floors, and white scrubs. The costume that Mark dons in this run is not only a metaphor for his mental state being completely stripped, but it is also a symbol of containment. Just as the white walls of the mental institute confine Mark, the white suit of the Moon Knight confines the multiple identities all living within Mark's body. We've seen how white can be utilised as a creative tool to add depth to the character, but what if we make one small adjustment to the negative space? Colour. Where Greg Smallwood used negative space as a way to separate Moon Knight from both reality and his other identities, as well as being a metaphor for Mark Spector's complete mental reboot, Matt Fraction decided to take the same fundamental idea of negative space and give it a completely different purpose by adding one small detail: colour. Fraction's 2012 run on Hawkeye is hailed by fans and critics alike as the definitive Hawkeye series. Not only is the writing insanely clever, witty and grounded, but the art by David Aja solidifies the run as one of the most influential comic books in modern comics. Much like Greg Smallwood, Aja utilises negative space in his own unique way on the Fraction run. Smallwood used the space outside of the panels as an artistic tool in of itself, whereas Aja opts to use flat, pastel-coloured backgrounds within the panels. This stylistic choice mirrors the comic itself, as the Fraction run is a quick, punchy, colourful romp with a much more laid-back tone than that of Moon Knight. A great example of this is how David Aja lays out action across the page. Take this page for example. We are given small, simplistic shots of key movements with no dialogue, much like quick cuts you would find in any given blockbuster action movie. This lets the reader follow the action with much more ease than that if the comics were filled with large dialogue bubbles. something which this run in particular is very restrained on. Although these modern examples of negative space have been praised for being groundbreaking and hugely influential, it would be doing a huge disservice to ignore the true blueprint, the original, the godfather of graphic novels, Sin City. Between the years of 1991 and 2000, Frank Miller wrote and illustrated arguably the most legendary graphic novel of all time. Miller's take on the neo-noir genre has gone down in history for such, not only for his dry, dark writing style, but more so his jagged, grisly art style. More specifically, his use of negative space. Sin City is chock full of almost entirely black panels, with Miller often drawing panels and characters lit by one harsh, high-key light source. This gives his characters a sharp, dramatic, film noir look. A character that greatly benefits from this artistic choice is Marv. With his sharp, rectangular face shape and stocky build, the singular light source emphasises his brute jaw and baggy eyes, as well as having one other interesting effect on one key detail: his bandages. Much like Lemire's run on Moon Knight, Frank Miller decides to use negative space in a striking, eye-catching way by drawing Marv's patched-up injuries as bright white negative spaces all over his body, at points almost covering his entire face and becoming the only distinguishable detail of his body, symbolising the internal build-up of pain and lust for revenge in Marv's heart. If he continues down this path, it won't be long before he's nothing but white, blending right into the city itself. Much more so than any other graphic novel, Sin City uses negative space as a lighting source to beautiful effect. Moon Knight used it as a symbol for Khonshu, the moon god's presence, as well as Mark Spector's fragile, bare mental state. Hawkeye used it to emphasise quick actions, and Sin City uses it as a character in of itself. The brightest whites and the darkest blacks act as a blanket of cover, and in a way, a dramatic tool, paired with panel size and shape to create a sense of claustrophobia. When the entire page is white, we cling to the black details, much like the characters in the city clamour for safety from the shadows. As in Sin City, the negative space in between the panels is the safest place to be.